Well, this is one thing. I remember I've been a guest on your show a couple years ago. We talked about the Supreme Court and how we both really, really don't like it. And I was happy to have you on this week to sort of have another conversation on it, because this same stupid problem is rearing its ugly head again with Stephen Breyer, who is now saying that he doesn't want to retire, even after seeing what happened with Trump and how devastating that is for like the legacy of the court and all this stuff. He said this line, and I want to hear your thoughts about it. And we also have a really great defense of the Supreme Court in CNN that we might read a little bit from in a second. But this is what Stephen Breyer said. If the public sees judges as politicians in robes, its confidence in the courts and in the rule of law itself can only diminish, diminishing the court's power.
Yes,
which
good.
Which is like one, yes, I want to diminish the court's power. And two, I'm sorry, I don't understand how you can be sitting here in 2021 and to not recognize that SCOTUS is a political organization, right? And that these people very much are associated with political parties and political ideologies. It's just amazing to me for somebody to be arguing about that so bluntly, especially somebody in the liberal camp, which had gotten beaten so badly by refusal of Ruth Gator Jesus Christ.
Ruth Gator Binsberg.
To not retire at, giving Trump more and more opportunities to put through reactionaries in the Supreme Court.
This is the thing I think that gives me the least amount of hope for Democrats. If I'm just like sort of taking off my personal feelings hat and putting on my like agnostic thinking cap, because it's the thing that they harp on the most. I mean, Democrats voters, like
they love
faith that they'll actually see the light, because this is the thing that they harp on the most about, like strategy and thinking, and like, they're doing some sort of like, mental jujitsu, forgetting the fact that they basically abandoned like the Congress to Republicans. They've abandoned all that shit to Republicans. Like they think they got you when they say, well, if you don't vote for Democrats, like they're gonna, we're gonna lose the Supreme Court.
We're gonna lose the court.
We've already lost the court. They've forgotten that. I don't know how you forget that we've lost the court.
Gonna lose it more.
But I mean, definitely you can always lose it more, right? But it seems, well, I guess until there's all 9 Republicans, but it seems as though like when they talk about this, they totally forget that there's a second layer of strategy involved, which is that the Democrats have to sort of follow through on their like literal strategy of like making these choices matter, right? And they don't do that. And that's the kind of thing that like when it comes to like, their promises to pass laws and their promises to do all this and that, like people have already accepted that they cannot do that for some reason. I don't know how you can accept that. But the Supreme Court, like that's their whole platform at this point. That is like, we can gussy it up with all these other things, but their whole platform is like, if you don't vote for us, we're going to lose a judiciary, and that's going to be the end of America. And then, once they're empowered, no one ever seems to actually make moves to ensure that. They never nominate young judges. Republicans always nominate younger judges than they do. They want to nominate 90-year-olds to the judiciary. They want to nominate the oldest woman in the world to judiciary to make sure like people see how woke they are. And it just seems like the most obvious scam in the world. It seems like the most obvious con in the world. But I think, now that I'm talking about it out loud, I think it just appeals to a certain level of Democratic voter that is this upwardly mobile, like kind of selfish person who like, they think that you should do the greater good because that's what they, think they think.
It's West Wing mindset.
Yeah, but that professional advancement, making your name in the professional world, is that not really the most important thing? And shouldn't we all be forced to sacrifice for this idea of like one upwardly mobile liberal? Because that's just like, that's very flattering to the Hamilton list. That's the plot of Hamilton, basically.
Yeah.
That's the Hamilton fans. Like that's very flattering to the very specific slice of media consumers who are also happen to be media writers. Like they're writing like, I've had Kamala Harris kind of fucked over the Black community, but isn't it important that she was able to advance career-wise? Because ultimately, don't I want to one day be the first blank, blank head of New York Times, blank head editor of blank? And it's just like, like this competition that exists within these communities allows it to be very easy for them to just like throw away any real strategy for like this craven idea of advancement.
Well, like there's a couple of things. There's like one, if I was more conspiratorial, you would think that the Democratic Party essentially is just going to bungle again, how to tactically deal with the Supreme Court, because it's a great browbeater to use in the next election when they put up some kind of uncharismatic neoliberal moron, to get people to say, oh, well, you have to support or else you'll lose the Supreme Court. But I actually don't think it's like a grand conspiracy that's like emanating from like the Democratic Party itself. I think it really does come from like an ideological deficiency of not understanding power, which is why liberals are so attached to it, right? Like the Republicans understand, McConnell's like, okay, we're just not going to let Obama put in, even have a hearing,
yeah,
right? And then we're also going to force into super conservative judges when we have the ability to. While Democrats still cling on to this idea that, oh, well, the court is very sacred. And it is nonpartisan, and we don't want to make the court political because that would ruin our system of government. Instead of understanding the only reason the Supreme Court matters in this way is because it is functionally, for a few centuries now, has been a political organization, something that was taken by the Supreme Court too. This isn't something that's in the Constitution. The Supreme Court asserted its power, and Democrats continue to refuse to recognize that power dynamic, while the Republicans are very, very good at, wearing the clothes and talking the talk. And then think about like, Bush v. Gore, right? They said basically, when they made that rule in there, never cite this, right? Don't cite this ruling as precedent, right? Which should just show you that they're using this very clearly, for political advantage. But yet on the Democrat side, it's like, oh, well, these are sacred institutions. We should never politicize them, taint them.
Well, they say that, and I don't know how much they believe that, because it's never so much about, you can never believe what people say they believe, in my opinion. But I do think also there is a level of difference between the Republican Democrats that just comes down to, like you said, what their goals are. The Republicans are about consolidating power because it enriches them and, and it's sort of like closest circle of donors, and like, they are willing to speak to the bottom rung of society as much as they have to like get them to like re-examine their goals and put them in line with the top 1%. The Democratic Party, they are trying to have a similar party of landlords and tenants that the Republicans have in that situation. But they've stripped out the combining factor of like racism and xenophobia, at least in like the sort of like the explicit level. And they're trying to replace it with this sort of kumbaya nonsense, right? And it's all meant to disguise what is essentially a Ponzi scheme, because more so than staying in power as a party, Democratic Party, I think, and it's, kind of, I think, goes to the Supreme Court too, but a lot of their appointments, a lot of like their job decisions, they're about personal advancement. They're very much about like setting their friends up and their cousins up and their nephews up. Like they've been trying to get Rahm Emanuel a job for weeks. Like, why do that? No one likes him. It's just like, as a political party, like constantly putting people that no one likes, that people are always complaining about, that their own constituency do not like them in positions of power just because they know somebody or they did you a favor like a year ago. Like that to me doesn't speak to winners mentality. That speaks to like a lot of losers mentality. But I think, again, that speaks to like that kind of like self-dealing nepotism that is very, very, coddled and excused within the sort of liberal upper middle class spaces, the sort of like Rory Gilmore spaces, where it's like, yeah, I got a job through my friend, but that doesn't mean I'm not qualified. That doesn't mean I'm not supposed to be, the head consultant for the John Ossoff campaign, in Georgia. That's even if I've never won anything in my whole life. A lot of that speaks to where the Democrats fail. Republicans, they play dirty, but I think sometimes they're just also a lot more willing to just cut their nose off if they, cut their right hand off if it offends them, right? It's like, okay, well, if we got to throw someone under the bus, you'll never hear us say the name again, except for when we fundraise off that MFer on the sidelines. Like Mitch McConnell barely wants to say Trump's name, but I bet he'll send out those campaign fundraisers. Like, the Democrats are just willing to like chain themselves to losers in a way that like I can't understand. Other than like they just like them.
Yeah, I mean it's a completely like it. The whole thing about politicizing the court, which disempowers it, implies like the court's above politics, right? Which is fundamentally our problem here, and yeah. And I just want to bring up kind of related, not related to the Supreme Court particularly, but the Democrats are talking now about how they can't get the Republicans to agree with them for Dreamers. without wanting to completely get rid of asylum, for instance. And the Democrats at this point, like on how many issues do we need to see this where they're not a good faith negotiating partner? Democrats just need to get rid of the filibuster and start passing things. And they should use these moments. This is a bit of a different topic, but use this moment to signal let me just play this Tim Ryan thing because this is about.
Oh, this is so good. Wait, before you do play, and I'll say that after.
Because this is it's like waiting for bipartisanship, and this is specific to the January 6th thing, and it's like these are actually opportunities to break with this bullshit dream we're inflicting on ourselves as like a political party as Democrats, whatever, right? And obviously they don't want to take it. They want to stay in the dream because I guess the dream is better for fundraising. I don't know. Here's Tim Ryan. You guys will hear this. You won't be able to see it.
I want to thank the gentleman from New York and the other Republicans who are supporting this and thank them for their bipartisanship. To the other 90% of our friends on the other side of the aisle, holy cow. Incoherence. No idea what you're talking about. Benghazi, you guys chased the former Secretary of State all over the country, spent millions of dollars. We have people scaling the Capitol, hitting the Capitol Police with lead pipes across the head, and we can't get bipartisanship. What else has to happen in this country? Cops. This is a slap in the face to every rank and file cop in the United States.
If only, literally and figuratively, it were.
I would just like to say, among the 343 people arrested, 43 were either military or first responders, and 10 cops specifically have been charged or punished for January 6th. So
yeah,
they got to slap themselves.
Yeah, this is like getting upset at a climate scientist who's just clearly funded by the American enterprise and just like, come on, agree with us. Look at the science with us. And no, the whole reason those people stormed the Capitol wasn't because we have a deficiency in the national security state. It's because their party was lying to them about the election being stolen. That's not a security problem. That's a political one.
Yeah, I actually agree. I think that ultimately speaking, like the Democrats have set themselves a impossible bar. And like David said, I am conspiratorial, but I don't think that this is like an actual conspiracy. I think it's like a fallacy of liberal ideology where they have to have their enemies agree with them in order to want to move forward. Like a lot of times you will hear people say that they need like consensus in order to move forward anything. Like that the majority of people have to believe that the police are bad for you to get change. I don't know why anyone would believe that in this country, other than like the Democrats have consistently pushed that as this sort of like bar that is set for any kind of progress to happen. And it just has never been true in this country. And so I think, sometimes that's done to avoid making any real decisions, but sometimes you have like the inmates running the asylum, and eventually people who actually believe that stuff get into positions of power, and it just becomes an impossible mix mash of true believers and grifters. In any con institution, it's just a bunch of grifters, a bunch of true believers, and everyone's on edge because no one knows who's who. And ultimately speaking, I think it's had a negative effect on how people, the imagination of Americans when it comes to social change, because like they just think that there is an impossible bar of I guess 60% majority, 51% majority that they have to reach, that they've also been told is impossible because 50+% of the country just happens to be to the right, which is also not true. Right. So it's like, it's a dual-sided attack to keep people who may or may not have good impulses politically from thinking that they can make an effect real change with just a handful of people.
I just wanted to, before it gets lost to history, remind folks that David Lynch endorsed Tim Ryan. And probably one of the strangest political alliances ever. And it's because Tim Ryan likes to meditate. So David Lynch is like, that's the kind of spiritual change that we need in this country.
I would not have guessed that about Tim Ryan.
Practically Lynchian, in its strangeness.
It's pretty.
I just remember, was he crying Ryan? Was he the one who said that Bernie should stop yelling? I mean, a lot of people said that.
I think he did say something like that. Yeah, and he also like donates a lot of, because David Lynch has like a very funny like charity for transcendental meditation. I think Tim Ryan's helped him out a lot with that as well.
Yeah, Tim Ryan did tell Bernie you don't have to yell during one of the debates.
My God. That's such, I can't like, honestly, and now this like bloated idiot's like freaking out on the the halls of Congress.
Yeah, you don't have to yell, Tim. Come on.
You know, about about bipartisanship of all fucking things.
Like, yeah, they're just too conciliatory. I mean, like, trying to appeal to them on like their love of cops. Well, like, they're lying. Okay, they're lying. What do you want me to say? And I think that like sometimes when like we get to this point with people where it's like, okay, well, they're just not telling the truth, and you have to be an adult even when they're not. And like, and that might sound patronizing, but it's like they're just lying. Okay, like if someone's operating in bad faith, and I think this is another fallacy or like terrible tendency that have been taught to people by our media political culture, or political media culture rather, that like you have to enable the most bad faith arguments and ideas and whatever, much less being unable to identify them from anybody who submits them to you, because like that's just the only way to change hearts and minds. But you know what, I'll tell you, some people are just dumbasses and liars, and you shouldn't waste your time with them. Like you should be able to determine who's like operating from a place that can be changed versus who's operating from a place that can't be changed, regardless of whether it's from good faith or bad faith. Some people just been watching too much Newsmax, and it gave their brain boomeritis, and you can't deal with that. But like the whole like, don't you love the cops? Don't you believe in the sanctity of the law? And it's just like, no, obviously they don't. They're criminals. Like, who are you talking to? It's like they almost believe that there's a silent majority out there. It's like, no, of course not. They're cheating. Like, duh, don't you know that? Don't you know how any of this works?
I really want to make this clear for folks, because we're in very much agreement on like the Democrat, like we're not lobbing these criticisms at the Democratic Party because we have hope that they're going to change. We're trying to criticize like an ideology that is not just ineffective, it's really dangerous. And I want to just lay out these arguments really quick about the Supreme Court for people who might just be listening to this who aren't familiar. We're saying that it's bad that Breyer's not going to resign because it allows the Republicans potentially to increase their power over a partisan organization that the Democrats and liberals continue to refuse to admit is a political organization. But beyond that, we don't want to have the Supreme Court because we don't want a body standing over democracy like this. All of the arguments that people make for why we need the Supreme Court are wrong. This idea that it protects us from the tyranny of the majority, right? As you know, the Supreme Court is the one thing that's going to stand up for minority rights in the United States.
Literally, what they mean is rich people.
Yeah, the minority, the 1% is a minority.
Exactly.
There's only one minority that they care about is corporations and rich people.
Yeah.
Literally any moment in American history where the U.S. government has done something, not just like typical American government evil, but just like straight up genocidal, the Supreme Court has stood with them, right? And even the kind of arguments that the main argument that people talk about is Roe v. Wade, right? And the right to abortion, right? Which obviously, is better than not having abortion available in the United States. But don't forget, Roe v. Wade didn't just happen out of nowhere. Roe v. Wade happened because there were mass movements and momentum all around this country to make sure that women had the right to an abortion, right? And what the Supreme Court functionally did was stamp out that activism and has always put the right to an abortion as like a kind of suspended threat that it can be taken away like that. And we're looking at a potential like that might happen, in this coming year with the Supreme Court, right? And for decades and decades and decades of a question that we thought was settled was always looming over our heads. And the groundwork that got it to that point initially, that created the conditions for Roe v. Wade, right? It does not exist with the same kind of fervor today, meaning that, if they do pull it back, we're going to have to rebuild all of those organizations, all of that momentum, right? And have to have this fight again instead of settling things once and for all, right? It's just like, you have to understand that like dealing with these big questions through the court is a dangerous strategy in general, because it always leaves them to another ruling. When what we should be saying is that there shouldn't be an institution that sits over democracy. It's funny to talk about. Remember when we were hoping that Bernie Sanders might be able to sneak through? We all knew exactly what a Bernie Sanders presidency was going to be like, even if he controlled the Democratic Party, which he wouldn't have, and had a majority in Congress. It was going to be a constant fight with the Supreme Court, which was going to try to strike down any kind of radical plan, from Medicare for All, Green New Deal. Right? This is an institution that we have to be laying the groundwork to be in conflict with, because it is an organization that is set up to implement, a very strong iron fist of class war against working people and socialist left movements.
That's a good point, David. I'm actually surprised by what people think is functional, just generally speaking, when it comes to like a sustainable society in terms of like what people think like will lead to even the most possible positive
Mhm.
solution. And by that I mean like, I don't think you can live in a country where your civil rights are possibly rolled back every 4 years. Like that's like no other country lives like this. Like, the same way you can't live in a country with piecemeal gun laws. Like they don't work. We just have mass shootings all the time. And no other country
Mhm.
has that either. Just like you can't live in a country with like scatter plot pandemic quarantine laws. We didn't do that either. We got what 1 in 600, I'm sorry, no, like 1 in 450 or 1 in 500 Americans dead of COVID-19, the most in the whole world. Like I just think that people have been conditioned to think that this kind of like drowning feeling that they are feeling constantly is a
Mhm.
homeostasis that's possible, or that anywhere else in the world is like this. It is not. Nowhere else in the world is like so precarious, but the precarity is the point. Like you're
Yeah.
supposed to feel, especially the Democrat. I mean, the Supreme Court for the Democrats, maybe less so for the Republicans who use it as an actual tool to get their stuff through. Like, just operates as a way to like warn you if you ever try to get any more than just like keeping the defense up, you'll lose everything. And
Mhm.
like at a certain point, that's just not a feasible position to be in. And like the same with the whole like changing Democrats. I don't believe you can change Democrats. I think that that's like I think that's a fallacy. I think that's what we were saying earlier when it comes down to like the mask mandate. That's a way to get you as the individual to try to like adopt all the responsibility of an
Mm.
institution that is like supposedly supposed to be doing something, because you know in your heart that they're not, and you know that no one you talk to cares,
Mm.
and that's just it. Like that's just it. Like people know Democrats don't give a shit, and they know in their heart that they won't help, and so they know they have to keep quiet about it, because if they told what they feel like are the rubes who vote for a Democrat, then they wouldn't vote for them. But there are no rubes who vote for Democrats like that, except for like the handful of people who read the New York Times. Everyone else is just being held hostage because the other people, uh the people rather, because the Republican Party just functions as the gun to your head, while Democrats just function as the hostage taker. And that's like, I think it's just a flaw in people's analytical, you know, instruction to view them as not necessarily separate parties, because they are separate parties, but to view them as like not part of the same system, part of the same sort of like codependent toxic system that like makes it impossible to extricate one from the other. You can't even imagine the Democratic Party existing without the Republicans. All they do is play defense. So what would they do? And so like, I focus more on changing people's minds, because not to say Democrats aren't people, but like the moment someone says that they have such a huge investment in the Democratic Party that their ego is tied up into like whatever Nancy Pelosi is doing, I don't know what you can say to them, because like those people are scamming you.
You
you
know,
know
like let me like just like an example, like in Texas, right, or in South Carolina, like the places that I've lived, southern states where the Democratic Party isn't the party in power. You have people who are like, okay, well, we have to support them and push them because obviously the threat of like GOP government is absolutely damaging. And I agree completely that you need to do everything you can to weaken GOP power. But when it comes to the Democrat one, I think that's not the long term solution, because I just don't find any kind of. I don't think that for example, for Texas to have better left wing socialist policies, we need to go through some prolonged period of like Democratic Party rule. I think there has to be a break, but that's a whole other conversation. The point I want to make is like you start to wonder why you're even spending any energy trying to support an organization that one constantly shoots itself in the foot, and then in government doesn't not only acts as a doormat oftentimes to the Republican Party, but a friendly aider and abetter. Like an example of that is, and we're going to talk about it a little bit later in the show, Matt and I, but in the Texas House today, you'll love this. They had a pretty much bipartisan support for a bill that allows police departments to kill people with drones. Right? That's Democrat and Republicans supporting that, right? In the context of, Black Lives Matter protests, all these conversations about how we're thinking about policing, right? You don't even have people who have the backbone to say, hey, I don't think that we should empower maniacs in the police
Sorry, got a little
department
burp there.
to drop bombs on people.
No, I mean they do it already though. I mean they bombed Christopher Dorner that time with a drone when he was in California. I remember that in college.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a wild couple weeks. If the smile on my face is not wistful and happy, it's an embarrassed smile from burping live on air. Certainly not wistful and happy thinking about Christopher Dorner and his.
Just on the Dorner story, I was watching the documentary on Netflix about the that girl who went missing at the hotel in downtown LA. I forget what that hotel was called, but anyway, she went missing and she ended up found in the water tank up top, and it was this big mystery. But the cops basically weren't able to adequately investigate that, including opening up the lid to look to see if there was somebody drowned inside, because they had their hands full with the Dorner shit.
Yeah, they were too busy shooting 3 9-year-old Dominican women driving around in like a different colored car. Out of fear. But I mean, not to interrupt you, David, but to your point, I think that you're right. I mean, I don't want to, maybe I'll contradict myself a little bit by saying like, I don't want to sort of come across as trying to convince people like to not try to work with Democrats, because that's not my point. I think more so people need to be fully aware of all the dimensions of the problem. And I think that there exists this layer of it where people feel a little bit afraid if they just admit the truth that, these people aren't trying to help you. They know the problem. Nancy Pelosi knows the problem. All people know the problem. They're just liars. And like that they fear that they're going to be speaking truth to that problem, speaking truth to just like that they're not ignorant, that they're not like being held at all sides by Republicans, that they're just, they just don't care, would be to empower Republicans. And so like it's on you to take on the burden of like keeping this secret from them. And all that honestly does is just like empower Republicans further, and more than even Republicans, it empowers like the far right further to come in, people like Trump, and say, you never hear how much Democrats just never help people. They never help the Black community, they never help whatever. And like, yeah, maybe people don't vote for him, but it's enough to suppress a few votes, along with the other things Republicans are doing to suppress millions of votes around the country.
Absolutely. Well, Brandon Sutton, patreon.com/expand the discourse podcast. Check it out. At Pretty Bad Lefty. Also, anything else we need to plug, Brandon?
I mean, I don't really do much. I think it's easy for me to come across as being like, pro quarantine, because I don't like going outside except to like work out. But, I'm working on streaming. I keep trying to figure out how to get this thing going. I might play Baldur's Gate on stream. Yeah, the latency. I'm trying to figure out the latency issue but the latency won't matter for Baldur's Gate or like card games. So once I figure out the latency stuff, I'll play faster games. And then once I really figure out, I'll play Parappa the Rapper, and I'll really, I'll show people what it means to be an adequate rapper.
Do you have the Discourse Twitch set up?
There is a Discourse Twitch setup. My co-host John already does Twitch streams and plays video games, does interviews there as well. We had Marshall Steinbaum on recently to talk about certain things. We had Esha on recently from the Historically podcast to talk about the history of Stalin and other forms of like the whitewashing of, not whitewashing of Stalin, but whitewashing of American history to paint Russians and paint USSR in a more negative light than they deserve to be painted in. So yeah, we're doing a lot of stuff on there too. Hopefully more stuff soon, because I've been getting into gaming, developing carpal tunnel. Like I have a little click when I do with my hands now. Oh wow, yeah. You doing controller gaming or keyboard? I don't game with a keyboard. I'm a child. I never grew up past this point. Oh yeah. I probably shouldn't show my hands on stream. I think people are perverts now, and they like that.
I thought it was feet.
Is there really is there like a wiki feet for hands?
I don't know. I have really weird hands. People feel polarized about them. I think people feel like they're really big.
Yeah.
Show hands. It's after 8.
Show hands. Show hands.
But Brandon, thank you so much. And,
I do have nice feet, though. I will say that.
Well, my feet. People should know, just as an incentive to sign up for our Patreon. I think David, did my feet appear briefly in the post game? I think my bare feet. Yeah, and I didn't know that happened. But anyway, with that note, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with the rest of the show, folks. And thank you once again, Brandon.
Oh, thank you for having me. I hope this wasn't too bad. Sorry for all of the live gaff. Now you know why I don't do live, folks. Except for all the time I do live, I guess. But it's fine.
Yeah, you're old hat at it now. All right, see you, folks.